Welcome back, everyone, to the Fantasy Crossover Podcast. We are your co-hosts, Danny Duarte and Brian Acevedo. Today, we're kicking off the start of the NBA season with our the first half of the week. Just again, overview of what to expect from a basketball perspective, how that impacts in fantasy, just strategy and selection for players, and things to look out for. So, without further ado, I'm going to get right into games to be on the lookout in the first half of the first week. So on Tuesday night, we have a couple of really important opening night games. We have the Nets versus the Bucks. This is going to be a really interesting game given the fact that Kyrie's projected to be out. Again, it's undetermined, but most likely. So how is James Harden and Kevin Durant going to lead this Nets team versus the reigning NBA champions of the Milwaukee Bucks, and just how fresh are these Bucks? We had several Bucks participate in the Olympics, so again, how are they going to mesh right off the bat? Another important game to be on the lookout for is Lakers versus Warriors. The Lakers obviously made a lot of big moves in the offseason, a lot of new players and new faces in the system. How will they all mesh in this first night? A lot of people aren't projecting them to hit the ground running, so to speak. It's going to take a little while to see, but it'll be interesting to see how all these guys contribute from a fantasy standpoint and a statistics standpoint. And then with the Warriors, they do have, the majority of their core coming back. They also did make some key signings such as Otto Porter. They also have some new rookies like Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody. Again, how does this team mesh in opening night versus the Lakers?
Yeah, man, those are gonna be some really entertaining games to watch opening night. I think the NBA did a great job kind of picking, hey, these are some of the marquee names. You got Steph, you got Giannis, you got Braun, KD. I mean, it makes a lot of sense why they did it that way. And then don't get me wrong, we still have a really strong Wednesday night as well. You have the Knicks and Celtics at Madison Square Garden. It's first look at Kemba Walker in a Knicks jersey, and a big question now with the Boston side of things is Jaylen Brown going to play? That's going to be a big factor. I know a lot of players in fantasy invested high draft picks or in auction drafts invested a lot of money into Jalen. So we want to make sure that he is hopefully fully recovered from COVID by the time that Wednesday night rolls around. Then in the nightcap, you have the Nuggets and Suns. For many, it's the first look at the number one fantasy pick in most drafts, Nikola Jokic. This is a really fun matchup for him against DeAndre Ayton down low in the paint. Ayton's done an interesting job on Jokic. He's like a really good defensive player to kind of body him, but still expect Nikola to have a really, really big opening night and kind of set the tone for the rest of the season.
It'll be interesting to your point at looking at Kemba in a Knicks jersey, just because again, how many minutes are they going to play him? We know Thibodeau likes to play his starters a lot of minutes, but Kemba might be an exception to that rule. And also, I'm fascinated to see how, in general, the minute distribution for New York is moving forward.
If I could quickly touch on that, actually, I have a fun stat for everybody out there, especially Knicks guys that manage Knicks players in fantasy. Julius Randle and R.J. Barrett are the only two players in the NBA that are averaging more than 30 minutes a game in the preseason. So if that's a sign for these Julius Randle and R.J. Barrett owners, I can tell you they are definitely going to get their minutes in this opening week.
Yeah, little bit concerning if I have to have my say, but nonetheless, they're definitely going to be high usage guys. And on Thursday night, we have a really fun game coming up. It's going to be the Mavericks versus the Hawks. Obviously, this is big time. You have Trey versus Luca, the two stars that were traded for each other on draft night. Their stories are always going to be intertwined with one another. It's going to be box office, and we're going to see, does Luca finally have the pieces around him? The Mavs did add some pieces such as Reggie Bullock in the offseason, and they have a new head coach in Jason Kidd. So does his coaching style kind of complement Luca's game and Porzingis for them to mesh really well? And also, does Trey, how does he mesh with this Atlanta Hawks team that made a pretty surprising run at the end of last year in the playoffs?
Yeah, man, absolutely. And when it comes to Mavs Hawks, the one thing I'm really interested in seeing is Kristaps Porzingis. I mean, you have a brand new coach, Jason Kidd. I know that he had a big issue with how he was used last year in Rick Carlisle's offense. I'm finding it really interesting to see how they utilize Porzingis. Jason Kidd's been really giving a lot of compliments to him in the preseason, but we've seen this before with Kristaps. The season starts pretty good, and then he doesn't start getting the ball, or he has a couple of off nights, and things start to derail. He gets injured, so it's going to be really interesting to see if the Mavericks can finally put it all together for the whole season.
Completely agreed. All right, guys. So next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna preview the weeks, each team's number of games played for the entire week. So I'm basically going to go over how many games each team is going to play. It just, again, this is strategy for fantasy owners in case you want to know which players to possibly pick up off the waiver wire, which players to start based off of how many games they're playing. So there's going to be multiple teams playing three games this week. They are as follows: the Boston Celtics, the Brooklyn Nets, the Charlotte Hornets, Chicago, Golden State, Houston, Indiana, the Lakers, Memphis, Milwaukee, New Orleans Pelicans, the Knicks, the Oklahoma City Thunder, Orlando, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Sacramento, San Antonio, and Toronto. So the majority of the league is going to be playing 3 games this week. And then with a couple of teams playing 2 games this week, we have Atlanta, Dallas, Denver, the Clippers, Miami, Minnesota, Portland, Utah, and the Washington Wizards. So the majority of teams are playing 3, a handful of teams are playing 2 games this week.
Yeah, and that's something interesting to note there. I wouldn't panic necessarily if you have a lot of guys that are playing just 2 games this week. Obviously, you still want to work your waiver wires. For the new guys, you want to make sure that you know and are familiar with how many roster ads you're allowed per week, because it does vary by league. So make sure you don't burn those all too early in the week, and you have some available for Sunday if you see that you're falling behind in a certain category. So something to definitely keep in mind, but definitely at an advantage for those 20 teams that are playing 3 games this week for sure. And speaking of waiver wire ads, we're going to go right into that. The top 3 ads of the week as of last week were Derrick Rose of the New York Knicks was up 29.5%. We had Joe Ingles of the Utah Jazz was up 24.2%. And then we had Nerlens Noel, also of the New York Knicks, plus 23.8. I actually found the Nerlens Noel ad a little bit interesting, especially with the news that Mitchell Robinson was clear to come back. So far, he was questionable going into Friday night's last preseason game. So we'll see how that ends up being. But based off last year's, you can expect Nerlens Noel is going to get at least 20 to 25 minutes as a backup center. Some other players to watch that are rostered in a few less leagues than those guys, though, if you're looking for those deep sleepers, we have Facu Campazzo, who's currently owned in only 25% of leagues. I would even argue the entire Denver backcourt are players to keep an eye on, especially if they rest Jokic, if MPJ misses any time or Aaron Gordon misses any time. You have Campazzo, you have Monty Morris, and you have the rookie Bones Highland, who's been getting rave reviews. In addition, other players to watch, I do have a lot of rookies on that list. I have Trey Murphy of the New Orleans Pelicans. He's a guy, especially now with Zion Williamson potentially missing time, there's an opportunity for him to earn some minutes in the rotation. You have Chris Duarte, another rookie there that's a really well-rounded player, two-way guard in Indiana. There's going to be a lot of injuries from what we're seeing on the Pacer side, which has been a problem that they've had in the past. So definitely Duarte can be a really good sneaky ad on your roster. Davion Mitchell, another really popular rookie, great with defense, particularly. He's someone that I would keep an eye on, especially as a young player in Sacramento. And then you have Darius Baisley. He's a guy that's been slept on. He's going to be a starter in Oklahoma City. He is the starting power forward. He's going to get you points, rebounds. His efficiency worries me a little bit, but if you're looking for a nice, solid piece to round out your roster, and he's available in a lot of leagues still, Darius Baisley is someone to definitely keep an eye on. And then lastly, stock up players, Brandon Ingram with the news that Zion's out, Trey Murphy as well for 3-point shooting. For the Nets, you have Patty Mills and Joe Harris with Kyrie Irving. His status is obviously questionable at best. Those are guys that you got to keep an eye out for that are going to get a lot of minutes probably in week 1. And then another pacer, TJ McConnell with Malcolm Brogdon questionable. Anybody from that list stand out to you, Dan?
Yeah, so with the rookies, a lot of the rookies that we're calling out have had glowing reviews from the preseason. So Trey Murphy, Willie Green called out that, he is fiddling and toying with the idea of putting him in the starting lineup with Zion being out. I would expect him to be put into the starting lineup. Chris Duarte, again, Rick Carlisle calls him out, for his impact right off the game, right off the bat. So with some of these Pacers players being questionable, like LeVert and TJ Warren to even start the season, someone to look out for. And Davion Mitchell, he's already got the nickname of Lights Out, or Night Off, sorry, I believe, where, he's clearly such a lockdown defender. De'Aaron Fox raves about him, and he had an amazing preseason. So again, these rookies, they've had great reviews overall to begin the year. So it wouldn't surprise me if they have impact right off the bat. And to your point, Brian, about some of the waiver ads, Nerlens Noel does surprise me, but I do worry about one, Mitchell Robinson's minutes right off the bat, even though Thibodeau does tend to play starters heavy minutes. Robinson was always an exception, just given his foul trouble and also right now his health. And also, Noel did get a decent sized contract right off the bat. So typically, when a player does sign, that does mean that they will have some impact. So again, these are some players that really stand out to me and could have an impact right off the bat, guys.
Yeah, and with Noel, quick point there. You guys who are looking for blocks, I think Noel was probably drafted in most of your drafts, but if for whatever reason you see him in your waiver wire, especially if you need defensive stats of any kind, he averaged over 2 blocks a game last year, over 1 steal per game last year. He's going to get minutes in New York, and he's a really solid defensive ad for your roster if that's what you're missing.
And also, he chips in the boards and has a decent field goal percentage, even though he doesn't take many shots. So just a pretty solid, safe player that really won't impact your team negatively, but will definitely help them out positively, in my opinion. All right, guys.
Yeah, and Brandon, let me tell you, Brandon Ingram, as a real quick, Dan,
Yeah,
Brandon Ingram as a fantasy owner of Brandon Ingram, it's definitely great news about the Zion injury. As much as I am hoping that Zion has a speedy recovery and he's 100%, definitely excited to see Brandon Ingram be the guy in New Orleans. I think he's really going to light it up. If you have him in you're on your roster week 1, he is going to put up some pretty good numbers, I think, in New Orleans.
and someone else to know besides Brandon Ingram that I just thought about is probably Jonas Valanciunas. You know, we were worried that with the trade, he was not going to be as dominant as he was last year with the Memphis Grizzlies because Zion was going to be in the paint with him. Let's see how JV starts off with a fresh team and no Zion. I would expect very similar numbers to what he put up last year with Memphis in terms of just being close to that 2010 range. So let's see if he definitely is one of those beneficiaries from Zion being out.
Yeah, man. Agreed. Agreed. There's lots of stuff to keep an eye on week 1, but don't be fooled. There will be guys coming back from injuries. The first couple weeks is a lot about observing and just kind of seeing how things look, but by no means is anything set in stone based off the first week.
Agreed. So, just things to be on the lookout for, guys. And finally, let's just quickly wrap up with injuries to be aware of that could impact your fantasy roster. So first off, we have Al Horford from the Boston Celtics. He has tested positive for coronavirus. That's not the start that Boston wanted, and also with Jaylen Brown already being out for coronavirus, it does kind of put two starters, well, one definitive starter and one possible starter out out of the starting lineup. So just use your IR spots wisely for either one of these players. But just something to note is that definitely don't drop Al Horford. He did put up great numbers last year. He was a top 85 player, and also we still don't know what Robert Williams' impact is going to be this year. We do have very high expectations for him that he's going to produce great numbers, but again, we don't know necessarily just yet. So Al Horford's definitely a great safe player to have. Next, we have James Wiseman. He is going to be returning soon. Just keep an eye out on his situation as he works his way back into the rotation. Something to note is he did have kind of a disappointing freshman year or rookie season with the Golden State Warriors, just considering where he was drafted and the numbers that he put up. Expect him to come off the bench for Golden State and just keep an eye on his stats and monitor his progression throughout the year. Marvin Bagley, we do have fans that have high hopes for him, but the right knee keeps being an issue for Bagley. It's, this guy just keeps battling injury over and over again. Is it time to say that Bagley is not going to be effective in fantasy? I wouldn't go that far just yet, but just he's someone that I wouldn't be too bullish on right now. Just keep an eye on him and possibly missing time. Taylon Horton Tucker is expected to miss 4 weeks with a torn ligament in his right thumb. So just keep in mind what Taylor Horton Tucker's absence would mean for other players. Someone like a Carmelo Anthony or a Trevor Ariza, Malik Monk, possibly. They could benefit from more minutes going their way. Another guy to be on the lookout for is Tobias Harris. He didn't practice with the team on Thursday, and he didn't play in the Sixers preseason finale either. So just keep him in mind as you do set your lineups. Malcolm Brogdon, again, we did note that he has missed the majority of the preseason with a shoulder sprain. And something to be on the lookout for is Brogdon does have some injury concerns in the past several seasons. So what does this mean? Is he going to be on a minutes restriction right off the bat? Could this mean more playing time for some other guys? And, what does it mean for him, kind of his overall value from the get-go? Bobby Portis, he hasn't played all preseason due to hamstring issues. You may have to drop him and hope to grab him later on in the season as the season progresses. He is someone that I believe will have fantasy value overall, but how much, it remains to be seen. Sergey Baka just returned to 3-on-3 scrimmages. I personally wouldn't draft Ibaka just yet. Back surgery is something that's very delicate. It takes a while to recover, and just he probably will have minute restrictions coming into the season. So just keep an eye on that. Let's see who else. Killian Hayes is coming off of a concussion, and Saddiq Bey has a left ankle sprain. So these are two highly coveted Detroit Pistons players that, again, it'll be interesting to see how they ease their way back into the lineup in the opening week. Miles Bridges did have a knee issue last week and didn't return, so just keep that in mind for Charlotte's opening night. And Chris Boucher is supposed to be making his comeback relatively soon. About a week ago, he was projected to be 10 days out. So that could mean great value depending on where you drafted him, especially if he went a little later than you expected. But this could hurt both Ken Burch's ceiling and also Precious Achiuwa, who has been a sleeper for a lot of people that didn't anticipate Boucher to be out for longer. And then lastly, Mitchell Robinson, who has been working hard to just get back on the floor. He finally is entering with a questionable tag. So we'll see how ready he is on Wednesday for the Knicks, if he does play at all, and if he's put on a minute restriction.
Yeah, man. And so I'll kind of quickly analyze some of these moves. So Al Horford, some of you guys know I'm an Al Horford manager. I'm a big Al Horford fan. I think, kind of like you touched on, I'm still not sold on Robert Williams in Boston. I know that they gave him some money this offseason, but I think at the end of the day, until he can prove that he can do 30 minutes a game consistently, with Al Horford, a really reliable veteran big who does a little bit of everything coming off the bench, he's going to be someone that is going to be valuable in fantasy leagues everywhere. The COVID thing, I think worst case scenario, he's back by the end of week 1, if not beginning of week 2, based off of protocols. I don't know exactly what his status is, but that would kind of be my best guess. As far as James Wiseman, Danny, I think you touched on it there. He's someone to monitor, not someone I would reach for necessarily, but you never know with what happens with Golden State. They may end up finding him to have a really good role on that team, especially as they're big, considering that team doesn't have a lot of size. With Taylon Horton Tucker, I think Carmelo Anthony is going to be the biggest benefactor of THT and Ariza being out. Obviously, he's going to try to get integrated into that offense very quickly. And every offense that Carmelo Anthony has ever played on, he is going to be a big factor. He's going to take a lot of shots. So we're going to see how he kind of gels with guys like LeBron, guys like Westbrook. He played with Westbrook, obviously, in Oklahoma City, but this is going to be a very different experience with him in LA. So curious to see how many minutes a game they let Melo run for. As far as Tobias Harris, I don't imagine it's going to be too serious. I think it was one of those cases where they just kind of held him out because it was preseason, and they're going to want him in a lineup once it comes to some of these big games they have coming up this week, especially against Brooklyn in the weekend. As far as Malcolm Brogdon, man, it's tough, man. Every year, it's kind of like, what are you going to get from this guy? You hope he's going to play, but there's a lot of games that he sits for whatever reason, and that's another reason that makes TJ McConnell so valuable to have. So that's something to consider. Sergey Baka, again, late round flyer for a lot of people. I kind of want to wait and see, especially that Clipper situation, how that ends up impacting him is going to have a lot to do with how valuable he can be from a fantasy perspective this year. Other than that, Killian Hayes and Saddiq Bey, I don't imagine they'll be out for too long. I think Detroit is a very young team that's going to want to get those young guys minutes. They're going to try to get them out there as soon as possible with Cade Cunningham and Jeremy Grant. And Chris Boucher kind of surprised me. I thought I remember reading that Boucher was going to miss like the first 3 to 4 weeks of the season. So now to see that he's going to come back so soon, I think that it actually leads the guys that put a lot of money into him in the draft. It's going to give them a really good feeling knowing, hey, I'm going to get this guy back a lot sooner than we anticipated. And Mitchell Robinson coming back, as a Knicks fan, I'm very excited to see Big Mitch back. I think he gives the Knicks a different dynamic, especially defensively. And for those that need blocks, Mitch Robinson is a big blocks guy and rebounds. and a very high field goal percentage. So he was going for like $1 or $2 in a lot of the auction drafts that we did, Danny.
Yeah, and someone that we didn't touch on, but that should be a name to monitor, guys, is Cade Cunningham. He did have, I believe, an ankle sprain, and they're saying they haven't given much of an update, but they are saying that they're not trying to rush him back to the court. So, again, we don't know necessarily what his timetable is or if this will impact the stats for opening night because it's just considered to be a mild sprain. But with Detroit, their lineups are always going to be funky, especially with Dwayne Casey kind of being the head coach. I remember last year it was questionable whether a guy like Corey Joseph played several, 20, 30 minutes plus, and they wouldn't give time to someone like Killian Hayes, who they were trying to develop. So overall, just monitor the Detroit Pistons situation as a whole from a very cautious standpoint because they're one of those teams that just their lineups from time to time makes no sense. So be aware of that as you get into the season.
Yeah, Kelly Olynyk is someone I think really you need to watch. Isaiah Stewart looks good in the preseason, but I can just see Kelly Olynyk just stealing some of those minutes from him. It's a shame because Isaiah Stewart, I think if they really wanted to, they could let him run loose and play 25, 30 minutes a game. I think it's going to be closer to 23, 24, but just by investing in a guy like Kelly O, you kind of limit unless we can see them potentially play together with Jeremy Grant at the 3. That's the only thing I can see.
Well, I mean, Isaiah Stewart, he does kind of have a similar syndrome to Rob Williams in the sense that he does get into foul trouble. So that definitely does limit his ceiling. And again, we're all very bullish on Isaiah Stewart. We think he has high potential. Rob Williams and him can easily be top 60 fantasy players for the year, but it all depends on just how much they limit their overall foul trouble and do not give the minutes away to backups like Al Horford or Kelly O.
Agreed, man. But overall, I'm just really excited to get this season started. Hopefully, if you guys have questions for us, we are available, obviously, on social media to answer. I know there's going to be a lot of lineup questions coming in, so we've already been starting to answer some of those. It's been fun to kind of have that fan engagement with you guys and just listen to the questions you guys have and who should I pick up here? Or who should I do this trade? There's going to be a lot of interesting conversations had, especially as we start to see these new teams and new players with their rotations start to take shape in the first month of the season.
Let's kick it off. Again, guys, interact with us on social. Make sure to like the video on YouTube. It definitely, like, subscribe, comment. It helps the algorithm. And we just can't wait for the season to kick off. So without further ado, thank you guys so much and have a great day.